I'm going to start this session by stating the obvious. You need to have a really strong reputation in your company in order to have a really successful company. Today, what we want to talk to you about is having a coherent company brand strategy and talent brand strategy. And what we want to show is the results that that can drive. In our session, I'm first going to kick off, and I'm going to share with you some data-driven findings about the power of aligning these two strategies. And then I'm going to hand over to Paul. And Paul's going to take you through aligning your brand practically. How do you go about it, and how has he gone about it in his company? So to begin, we first want to introduce ourselves so you know why we're here talking to you today. My name is Lindsay Brady. I've worked in LinkedIn for the last 4 years, and I often argue that I have the best job in LinkedIn, so anybody who disagrees, tell them to come talk to me. The reason I have the best job in LinkedIn is we use the LinkedIn.com dataset to work with our largest clients to help inform their decisions. So every day we're looking at LinkedIn data, and it's incredibly interesting. Something that the team's been working on recently is looking at, is there an alignment between work that people are doing around their company brand and their talent brand? What is that correlation, and can we quantify it? Today, what I want to share with you, hot off the press, are the findings of this survey, which we'll be releasing in a couple of weeks. But before I begin, I wanted to introduce you to Paul, who I'm delighted to be joined on stage by.
Thanks
Paul?
very much, Lindsay. Thank you. Well, I'm still Paul Maxin. I'm Head of Talent and Resourcing at the Financial Conduct Authority. I joined the FCA, as it's colloquially known, in March of last year. But prior to that, I've had, I know it's incredible with that old photo, but 28 years worth of experience in talent acquisition and talent. How can he possibly be that old, I hear you ask yourselves? Well, sadly, if you cut my arm and my wrist, you'll see enough rings to suggest that I am. As I was coming down here today, driving down the M11, I heard some interesting anecdotes about people making speeches and first speeches. And there was a guy, an elderly politician, now no longer with us, certainly infamous, called Enoch Powell. And Enoch Powell said, you should always start a speech, however long it's going to be, with a very full bladder. So if you see me hopping around, you'll see that I've taken that advice. But on the other hand, don't worry about it. I've just got a nervous twitch. I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you for choosing to join this session. I'm not sure where the boombox is coming from in the background, but if it comes on longer, I'll also get a dance routine in as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. So to open, I just wanted to share with you a thought. In the last 10 years, we've become aware more and more about the importance of employer branding. In the last 4 years that I've been working in LinkedIn, this is what our clients want to talk about. It's a really hot topic. The interesting thing is that HR leaders cite employer branding as a really high priority for them. However, according to a BCG study in Europe, when candidates come to interview, during that interview process, less than 10% of them can actually cite any of the key values of your employer branding proposition. So all that work you're putting in is definitely valuable, but what I want to try to bring to you today is how can you make that even more powerful? When we see this alignment happening of company brand and talent brand, what we see is that the impact is much greater. Companies are starting to realize this now, and they're pouring massive resource into this area. They're really trying to figure out how can we have narratives that are aligned, that will both attract candidates and also be appealing to our clients. I'm going to start by saying that there's no easy solution. It's complex, challenging, time-consuming, but it's worth it. So today what I want you to feel like is you can walk away and get started if you haven't already, and the small steps that you take will be beneficial. Ultimately, these two brand strategies are aligning. I don't think that you can avoid it, so I think the more that you do to be proactive, the better. Today I want to share with you some insights to show what the market is saying. These findings here are from a Universum study. They surveyed 2,000 executives and asked them, how strong is that connection between consumer brand and talent brand? The light purple bar is how executives are feeling now. And what you can see is that over 50% of executives said in their company today, they feel like there is a connection between consumer brand and employer brand. And some of them have even said that it's the same. What's really interesting here is when you look at the dark purple bar, you can see a 30% increase in the number of executives who say that there's an increased alignment coming between these two brands. This shows that a trend is really, really clearly emerging. And another interesting finding from this study. Universum also asked for organizations, do you have a combined strategy for your consumer brand and your employer brand? I was actually surprised to see that approximately 70% of respondents said that they do have some sort of a combined strategy, if not closer. What we're seeing is a clear change happening in the market that we wanted to bring to you today. Employees are now a component of your brand. When you think about companies of the past, branding was very product-oriented. Now it's moving much more towards what are your employees saying. They're advocates for your company. And that both impacts your talent brand and also your company brand. So that's how the execs are seeing the world. And what I wanted to make you leave here today feeling is, why should you care? What can you do about this? So I'm now going to share some findings that my team have done using LinkedIn data to show this correlation and how powerful it can be if you start to think about combining your content and aligning those strategies. So before we begin, I'm sure some people are aware of the metrics that we use. But to recap, in LinkedIn, we have 2 metrics that measure the strength of a brand. Talent Brand Index measures how attractive an employer is as an employer. And Content Marketing Score measures a brand's influence over its target audience. The first thing that the team wanted to do is look at these 2 metrics, which we have kept in isolation up until now, and cross-reference them and see, is there a correlation between companies that have a strong Talent Brand Index and also a strong Content Marketing Score? What are they doing that's working really well? What we found is aligning your company and talent brand is very effective. When we looked at the top 100 companies by Talent Brand Index, what we found is the Content Marketing Score of those 100 companies was 5 times greater than an average company on LinkedIn. So we saw that there's a definite correlation between activities happening in talent branding and also in content marketing. I love this graph. I know it looks really crazy, but stick with me. So I think this really clearly demonstrates the correlation between employer branding and company branding. You don't need to understand the science behind what's happening here, but what you can see is when you plot one against the other, all of the blue dots start to come together in the middle. And what this shows is that there's definitely a correlation that we're seeing there that's really strong. So when you think about content marketing, which is obviously usually considered to be on the company side, this can position you, as a strategic partner in your company. When you think about what you might be posting in that content marketing space, it can be thought leadership, it can be job posts, it can be company-wide content. Candidates are engaging with all of this, not just what you're focused on in the talent acquisition world. In fact, our members who consume content more generally about your company are going on to engage much more with your jobs. What we've seen is an 87% higher conversion to application in that group. And that's also leading to a greater rate of hire. On the flip side, if we look at it from a talent side, the work that you're doing around talent branding is also having a really positive impact on your wider business. What we're seeing is that our data shows when members view a job before, they then go on to have an 84% uplift in the amount of content that they're consuming about your company more broadly. So from both angles, you can see when you look from the company side or the talent side, the content that you're publishing on the platform is having a positive impact, not just for your line of business, but for your company as a whole. Talent's attraction and brand credibility is really heavily reliant on your employees, as I mentioned earlier today. So I didn't want to end today's session without talking about your employees. For me, people trust other people. They trust what your employees are saying about your company. We tried to quantify this to see what was the impact of an employee share. What we found is that 6 employee shares on LinkedIn has a really amazing influence on your network and what's happening for your company more broadly on LinkedIn. To quantify that, 6 employee shares gives you 6 job views, 3 company page views, 2 connection requests, and a follower. For me, those stats say you should definitely start working on how you're going to get your employees to start sharing more. And just one thing to leave you with before I hand you over to Paul, to talk about the bottom line for a minute. We also wanted to look at, for a company, is there an actual return on investment in monetary terms of aligning your branding strategies? And what we found is that companies that have a strong talent and company brand have 35% higher 5-year sales growth rate than companies of a similar reach. What we're seeing here is there's definitely a return on investment in aligning your brand strategies. So as I said in the beginning, it's painful. It can be rely on a lot of collaboration across teams at times, but for me, it's definitely worth it. If you don't believe me, I'm going to now hand you over to Paul, and he's going to talk to you about, in the FCA, what they've done practically, the steps that they've taken, and the results that they've achieved.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you, Lindsay. So firstly, just to connect this up, the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, just a little bit about us. We've been in existence since April 2013, so we came about as a result of the financial crisis, which I'm sure we can all remember. We are creating a market for conduct regulation. Much of the financial crisis occurred because of poor conduct. And directly and indirectly, we were all affected by that because as adults in the UK, we have financial products. So what we do is important. We ensure that fairness and standards are maintained across the UK financial sector. The UK is the second largest financial sector in the world, and we also regulate global organizations. So what we do has an impact not just in the UK, but globally too, regulating thousands of firms to ensure fair treatment of customers. We were set up to ensure that markets work well and fairly for the benefit of consumers. So there's 2 sides to the equation there, what financial services organizations do, but also the impact that what they do have on consumers as well. So in influencing policy on an international scale, we ensure that consumers' interests are best maintained as well. But key is we're often in the news, but we don't make things. So our reputation, we're as good as the people that we have. So in effect, it's the people that are our brand. We're only as good as the people that we have. So today I'd like to share with you how we've aligned both our talent and organizational brand strategies to achieve impact. But first, you have to look at the macro landscape. In our case, as talent acquisition specialists, we know that we're all operating in a changing market. It is ever thus. I mean, I've been involved in talent acquisition and recruitment, as I said, for a very long time. It's always been a changing market, and it's always been uncertain, whether it's a buy side or the sell side. So if we just think about some of the UK labour market at the moment, so some stats that have been provided by the REC and KPMG study earlier on in the year, we know that there's the strongest rise in permanent placements since March 2010, so over the course of the last 5 years. We know that permanent salary growth is as high as it's been since October 2007. And we know that the impact of vacancy growth is that it's a 15-year high. Equally, there's a falling availability of staff. So that's gone up from about a quarter, from about 25% to about a third during the course of the last year. So significant impact that's been had. So a mismatch between demand and supply. It's ever thus. All I'm saying is what you already know, that your jobs as talent acquisition specialists are increasingly hard. But from understanding our market at more of a micro level, then we know that we're able to build a strategy to attract top talent. But for us, there needs to be greater emphasis on people leadership and how people leadership impacts functional risk, so that combination of functional risk and people leadership. That outstanding risk leadership isn't being created. There's a need for it within banks, within asset management companies, within insurance companies, and throughout the finance sector. However, what's happening is that organizations are swapping talent rather than developing their own. As I said, that makes all of our jobs that much harder. So the macro and the micro landscape, and there's a lot more to it, but I'll start to go through some stats. But that's the kind of information that, amongst other things, informs a talent acquisition strategy and a talent strategy, because no organization sits in isolation, not just from what they do, but from the addressable market that they operate within. So from us, from our perspective, that's led to the development of the strategy, and the outcome of that, or an outcome of that, I'm pleased to say, is that we now have 97% acceptance rate on offers, so we are able to attract people to a new organization, Financial Conduct Authority, an organization it may be in the news, but what we do sometimes can appear a little dry. But we do that through creating authentic stories. Principles for a cohesive brand strategy, it says here. So the two simple ones. One is that top talent attracts top talent. It's not a rocket scientist, but in terms of we all have colleagues, the expression leveraging talent or leveraging colleagues. If we've got top talent, how can we build authentic stories about them and through channels that we use to attract people? But obviously, you can only do that if you've got content that's appropriate, interesting, engaging, and utilized through the appropriate channels, and that you're focusing that content on the people that you want to attract the most. So I'll split this a little bit into two. So top talent attracts top talent. As I've said before, and I'll continue to repeat it, our reputation is absolutely built around our employees, so my colleagues. I have a colleague in the audience today that I'm going to point out, works with me. And so if this goes well, I will say that I wrote it, and if this doesn't go well, I'll say that she wrote it, But it's about connectivity and how we utilize and work with our colleagues. But what it does, it drives a close link between our corporate and our employer brand. So using people, working with colleagues to attract others of similar profile, you can do that through communicating using authentic stories, and people, after all, are the most powerful brand asset that we have. So here I'm just going to focus on some people, some colleagues within our organization, and specifically focus with regard, in this instance, to diversity. So for diversity, we'll talk about gender here, LGBT, but I'll also talk a little bit about BAME as well. So within our organization, from a gender perspective, gender diversity, we believe that we've got a good story to tell. At the associate level, so that's a kind of entry level plus a professional level, about 50% of our new joiners, of our staff and colleagues are male, 50% female. That drops off when you get to the senior leadership team, so that's heads of department, directors and executive directors. So within our organization, that's about 90-odd people. But even then, 37% of that population are women. But then the good story is that when you get to the executive director level, then 57% of our executive directors are women. So there you are, there you have potentially, as far as gender diversity is concerned, a good story to tell. And we have a good story, and then you can develop and build those authentic stories via role models. So you see the two women on the right-hand side of the slide, so Deborah Jones and Mary Starks. About 18 months ago, the FCA, Financial Conduct Authority, increased its responsibilities to take into account competition regulation within the sector as well. Now, Mary and Deborah Jones are joint directors of competition. They head up the competition division within the organization, but on a job share. So they were recruited to the organization, not initially as a job share, but they've got complementary skills. One of them is an economist by background, one of them is a lawyer by background, but collectively, themselves, between them, the power of the two is greater than a single person. So within a job share, at a senior level within the organization, we're actually getting complementary skills that can lead to more progressive outcomes. That in itself develops a story, an authentic story, and that's a story that was picked up by an organization called TimeWise that, amongst other things, looks at diversity within part-time working. And the Financial Times picked up that story and ran with it as well. So we've managed to build a story that we've then been able to use from a talent and talent acquisition perspective. We have other examples as well. On the LGBT agenda, actually, I'll just focus on our acting CEO. I've always gone off-piste there, Tracy McDermott. Tracy has been with our organization and legacy organizations for a long time. She is regularly each year, including this year, on the Evening Standard prospect lists of the most powerful and influential people in London, more especially in the legal profession. She made a name and reputation at our organization through enforcement. So some of that's kind of headline-driven and concerns the very high fines that some organizations have been have had, and Tracy's been at the forefront of that. But really, she's been at the forefront of cultural change. So that's a cultural change. If we think about it for a moment, the perception of drink driving. Now, I'm 52 years old. When I was 20 years old, it seemed to be compulsory for people to, certainly when I was a student, to go to the pub, have a few beers, and drive home. Nowadays, naturally and quite rightly, that is frowned upon. There's been a gradual cultural change that we have in this country and beyond to drink driving. It's simply not acceptable. So cultural change and leading cultural change through what we do into the financial sector around conduct and creating that market for conduct regulation has very much been led by Tracy and looking at that agenda. She's now our acting CEO, and as I said, one of the 57% of women that are on our ExCo. If we look at the LGBT agenda, again, we look at role models there. As if by some simple twist of fate, luckily for us, the Outstanding issued their LGBT business leader list yesterday. And our HR director, Jacqueline Davis, is on that list, and she's regularly been on that list. She leads the LGBT agenda within our organization, but has in legacy organizations that she used to work with as well, both at Lloyd's and Barclays when she was there. She's also been a trustee of Stonewall for the last 10 years. And I think between 2011 and 2013, or for 2 years, was certainly chair of the Stonewall board. She's also very well known in the HR sector and a leading thinker. She's written a book about the truth about talent, which was published in 2010. She's also my boss, so I've used this as an opportunity to plug her book, albeit 5 years ago, so I can go back to the office with some pride tomorrow and say I've done a good job, Jacqueline. But in terms of authentic stories, she's somebody that I'd known for a few years prior to joining the FCA. So there's an authentic story about somebody who I respected within our sector, within the industry, who's somebody that I thought would be quite interesting to work with and to work for. Equally, yesterday, Outstanding announced that our chair, John Griffiths-Jones, was on the LGBT ally list of senior business leaders. So again, very, very important for us. And he's last year he was chaired a panel for a session, an organisation called Out in the Streets. And very much from his perspective, you know, as a white middle-class male, straight, is very much focused on leading the equality agenda throughout the financial services sector. So role models are important to us and are key. BAME, so Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. Our graduate campaign, we always ensure that we have an ethnic mix on campus, that the messages and partnerships that we have with other organizations reflect that. But ultimately, it's role models and culture. You have to have the right culture, and a culture that reflects internally as well as externally. This week, as part of Multicultural Week, there will be a number of events within the FCA. I'm sure we'll be tweeting about those and communicating about those through our Careers Twitter channel as well, and other channels too. And our graduate population, so future leaders, the intake that joined us earlier on this month, 29% of those are from BAME backgrounds. So all in all, it builds up, and we've only been in existence as we are for the last 2.5 years, is that top talent and talent attracts talent. You develop authentic stories and role models and ensure that you're creating those messages through the right channels. So I'm going to build this up. This is important to us, but it's also important to all of you as well. Here's a survey that was conducted earlier in the year by The Guardian. If we look at the FTSE 100 companies, CEOs or chairmen, only 7 are women. So we hear a lot about the proportional percentage of women on boards, but a CEO and chairman, interestingly it's called chairman in the Guardian slide, only 7 of them are women. However, 14 are called David and 17 are called John. Are there any Johns or Davids in this audience here? Because if you are, you've got a good chance of making it right to the top. It's in some ways a silly graphic, but it's a graphic that tells a story. It's very important to all organizations. Topped out, of course, by the fact that 19 people have the title Sir as CEOs and chairs of organizations in the FTSE 100. Only 7 women, 14 Davids, 17 Johns, and 19 Sirs. It's important. So our focus on gender diversity started to yield positive results. Within Glassdoor, we know a TripAdvisor for job seekers, we can see there from the data that 52% that are looking at us on Glassdoor are men and 48% women. Clearly that's not a 50-50 split. So at least that's informing us that we need to do more through that channel to at least get it to 50-50 or increase the balance of women if we see that that's the right thing to do. But Glassdoor is also a channel, so it's a LinkedIn conference, and here I am plugging another channel, but it's about a mixture of channels to communicate through. So we've very much developed an approach to passive talent through LinkedIn. Glassdoor very much is an approach that can attract, again, through authentic stories, attraction for job seekers. So the takeaway on here, and although we're latish adopters to Glassdoor, is that sometimes somebody said to me earlier today, and it's absolutely spot on, there are terms in our industry that I hate. So I'm just going to go off-piste here at the moment because the words are important. So this is nothing against RPOs, but I have a bit of a thing about the P because it focuses very much on the process rather than the delivery. But a lot of RPOs do great work, but it can tend to focus on one aspect. The takeaway here is that human resources, resources, who really wants to be a resource? And we talk about employees. Again, it's not particularly user-friendly. And I was chatting with somebody this morning, absolutely within their organization, to describe colleagues. I've used the term colleagues and talked about Lorna as being a colleague. And we're all colleagues of each other in organizations. So language is also part of culture and how we utilize things within our organizations as well. I've gone way off-piste from the notes, but just allow me that liberty. So we work with our colleagues as brand ambassadors for themselves and for our organization. And for us, conduct regulation, as I said, we're developing and creating a market for conduct regulation within the financial sector that didn't previously exist. So on the one hand, that's about developing people and attracting people to our organization, but in some ways, we can still perform our statutory objectives through conduct as an academy organization when people leave us at the right time and join other organizations within the financial sector. So that's not to say that we have we don't care about retention. Of course we do. But on the one hand, if people didn't move jobs within organizations or between jobs, there are probably many of us here in this room, and certainly one person on this stage right at the moment, who wouldn't have a career themselves or a job. So it's important, and it's important about collaboration and development. We often talk about the war for talent, and yes, there is, but I would reframe that within a collaborative way, because ultimately, when people leave our organization, having developed an approach and culture and skill sets into other organizations, we're still serving our own purpose. So it's about utilizing colleagues as brand ambassadors and ambassadors to your organization, both bringing talent in and when talent leaves your organization. Because when they leave your organization, they can also still be ambassadors and bring people through. So the other part of it is content is the key. As I've said before, we don't make things, we don't have consumer brands, but it's very important to have allies and work cohesively and collectively with others within your organization. Saw a great and informative presentation with Stephen Lockhead and Keith Weed from Unilever earlier this morning, and they spoke very much about, as you'll know, the importance of Unilever's collaboration with talent, marketing, and communications. As I said, we don't make things, but our ally within the FCA, within the Financial Conduct Authority, is that there is hardly a whiff of paper, a slip of paper between what we do and working closely with our communications colleagues, both internal communications and external communications, to build and craft those authentic stories. So I work very closely with our Director of Communications, and my colleagues in my team work very closely with his colleagues in team. We work cohesively, collaboratively together. And as I said, we don't make things. We often hear about what we do. I drive down the M11 every morning to get to Canary Wharf from where I live. It was a lot longer to drive. It was so close to Canary Wharf, great. A lot longer to drive down this morning, bad traffic. I get to hear the Today programme quite a lot because that's kind of the person I am. And many mornings and many days, the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, has a story or has impacted the news of the day. And we have people on it. Then, again, what we say and what we do has an impact that has an impact on the financial security of us as a country and us as consumers of financial products, but also directly and indirectly, they are our colleagues, and that has an impact on talent and talent acquisition as well. So we work very closely with communications, as I said. For instance, we're now just starting in the graduate recruitment round. You have to understand your audience. We, not new for many of you, but certainly within the Financial Conduct Authority, we work very closely with our comms guys to ensure that we launched a Twitter account, but a careers-focused and careers-specific Twitter account. And it'll start with the hashtag, has started with the hashtag Careers That Matter, and is focusing initially on graduate recruitment and the milk round, but creating authentic stories and developing and communicating those authentic stories, because ultimately it's a channel for potentially for one-to-one communication. But also, we have to, in some ways, govern that, doing what we do, and have some freedom, but have a framework to utilize that freedom as well. So with the graduate campaign, just for the milk round bit, or going out to universities, much of the content calendar has already been defined up to December. That content has been uploaded into the content management system, which in our case is Hootsuite. And then for the graduate campaign, we'll post event tweets on the content calendar, but we'll ensure that on event days, we're getting that communication back, that our people are emailing, sending photos and captions. We'll then upload and draft more tweets, and also monitor them 3 times a day during the working day. You know, we're only UK focused, but it just enables us to respond and remain engaged. And as I said, it becomes a channel for one-to-one communication, and not, I think, as some of the least value-added careers Twitter accounts are, which is just a repository or a glorified job board in 140 characters. So the other thing is to ensure that when you're actually working with content, it doesn't work all the time. Sometimes things don't necessarily go wrong, but you think, oh, that's really interesting. Doesn't really engage. So you adapt what you do to what's working and what's not working. Not a rocket science, I know, basic common sense, I know, but you'd be surprised how many organizations don't actually do it and just sort of spray and pray like some recruiters used to back in the old days when they sent CVs across. So adopting your strategy on an ongoing basis is key. We post content to a passive audience, and what we've learned using LinkedIn as a channel, that actually, much of the time, the most engaging content is business focused. Well, it's LinkedIn, so that's hardly surprising. You want to develop and engage with passive talent, people that are interested in your organization. It's not specifically about a job. So if it's business focused, lots of IFAs follow us, then that in itself creates engaging content and links both our people, what we do through the business focus with engaged content out there. Always look at how successful or unsuccessful each post is going to be. So over time, you learn to adapt, evolve, and change. So yes, it's important to have a content calendar. Yes, it's important to have some rigor. And yes, it's important to have the framework. But you also need to be able to adapt and invest time in an adaptable content strategy as well. So again, for some organizations, global organizations, these numbers are relatively small. But for us, it's been time well spent. Over the course of the last 18 months, we had our number of followers on LinkedIn has grown from, I think it's about 64 or 65,000 now, from 17,000 or so shortly after I joined the organization. So mastering content strategy with our communications colleagues has been absolutely key to driving some results for our employer brand. And it is time well spent. Clearly, from a talent brand index perspective, we've removed the organizations with whom we asked LinkedIn that we wanted to compete against. But again, it's a good story for us because when I joined in February or March last year, but I think when we first started to have these conversations, we were down at the probably even lower than 6%, but we were certainly 10 out of 10 with the organizations that we wanted to be compared against. So investing time has been well spent. So again, for in different sectors, a talent brand index of 17% may be low in some sectors. If you work in technology or communications, that may be low. It may be low for you. But within our sector, it's really good. So we're delighted. So to have the highest talent brand index amongst our competitors, and that's what's important for us, our talent competitors, puts us in a strong position. So the takeaway there is when thinking about what content you're posting, it's important to consider the impact that it's having on your overall reputation, as well as your employer brand. So there's an opportunity to drive engagement through target audiences in a way to promote our employer brand and also our organization's brand as well. So, reputation rules. To recap, it's important. Thank you very much for joining us here today. You heard from Lindsay earlier on, who gave some fascinating insights shared from Universum at the start of the presentation. So 80% of executives expect there to be a connection between consumer and employer brand. And really, I just wanted to share some of our journey with you to highlight that an employer brand, a people brand, and a company brand are inextricably linked in what it means for us. Not a rocket science, but the lens that we have on everything is top talent attracts top talent. That's people. That's all of us within your organizations and all people you collaborate and work with. But content is key as well to achieving those results. I'm just going to conclude this bit before the Q&A with a video. It's only 2 minutes, but it's a people perspective video, so it just highlights some of the people, and therefore through the people you get an essence of who we are and what we're about. Can we show the video, please?
My job can actually help make things better for a consumer at the end of the day, and I think that's amazing.
What's great about working at the FCA is the dynamic and varying workplace. You can be dealing with one small firm on one day and then dealing with a large institution the next.
When you join the FCA as a graduate, I think curiosity is key. You constantly have to ask questions and investigate things. This means that you constantly have to educate yourself.
Nothing stays still here for very long at all. The world outside the economy is constantly changing. Firms and the products they offer are always changing, and so we have to change to meet those challenges at all times.
You really get to understand the breadth of the financial market. We regulate a huge number of different firms that are cutting across a huge number of sectors, and that really gives you a unique opportunity.
You get to experience various parts of financial services here by rotating on the graduate programme. Rotating every year has always made me have to adapt to new situations very quickly. I've been able to pick up the confidence on how to engage with senior individuals.
If you're unsure or not clear on exactly what you want to do and you want to learn where you would like to go and create a specialism, this is the place to do it.
Regulation is so important to the financial industry. So much is changing. It's going to have implications for the future. There's no better place to learn about it than at the regulator itself.
So,
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.